Jimmy Lewis.
I'm Scott Hoffman.
We're with Dirt Bike Test, and today we're going to talk about the 2020 Husky FE501s. This is Husky's dual sport bike, and it is pretty much all compliant. We spent a lot of time riding it box stock, tires included. Of course, since we're Dirt Bike Test, we took the Continental TKC80s off, threw some Kenda Parker DTs on it to really at least get as much traction as we could, and spent a fair amount of time riding it. Scott rode it in California, I rode it out in Nevada, and this bike I'm pretty sure is competition mostly with its orange brother, the KTM 500 EXC. And then there's also another interesting thing we might talk about a little bit. They have dirt versions of this particular bike. So Husky has an FE501 and KTM has a 500 XCFW. So we'll touch on that lightly when we go through this impression.
Now for 2020, this is pretty much a brand new motorcycle. Now, being the frame's new, the plastic is new, subframe, the head has been revised. Now most of these changes have been like taken off from the previous year's updates. So this bike gets all the updates most of the Husky bikes have gotten in the previous year.
Yeah, it literally follows the motocross bike. It's just a little bit behind the motocross bike. I think maybe a year and a half if you count the factory edition. So the motor got smaller, a little more compact, mostly, and they shortened the head.
Right.
And all the chassis changes are just kind of adjusted to go around that, and then they tune it with their suspension. And this has quite a bit different suspension. It's probably the biggest change. It's an open cartridge fork, and then it has the WP shock, but it's set to match, so it's all worked. And then more than anything else, this bike is sound and emissions compliant. So it comes with a very restrictive muffler. It comes with a, believe it or not, a reed valve inside the intake that's just in front of the air filter. And this is all done for sound. And even the tires, the reason it comes with the Continental tires is mostly to pass sound tests. So that's something that you kind of want to know. It's not a competition bike. It is basically a street bike that you can ride pretty effectively on the dirt.
And compared to last year, the dual sport models, they've actually added a air
the dongle, the oxygen sensor, O2 sensor, narrowband O2 sensor, which is on there. We're not sure exactly how much that does. I have a little bit of information on it, I've been told, but it's on there also. On to power, and Jimmy's butt dyno says this thing makes what, 35 horsepower?
Maybe a little more than that.
38.
Yeah.
I'll give it 38. And I don't really care what the horsepower number is. I feel that this bike, for as quiet as it is, and it's ridiculously quiet, and that's probably why I said 35 versus 38, it has a really smooth, broad, long torque. I mean, the torque's like from the minute you crack the throttle all the way up to the end. It kind of feels like it just goes up and stays the same. There's not a big change. But it's got plenty of power for doing most of the stuff that you want to do as is, and there's definitely a ton of potential to uncork it. But I think the motor also changed, and Scott really feels this more than I do. It's got a little bit more revvy and a little bit more kind of aggressive and quick revving.
Yeah, I think they've made the motor, because it's so backed up because of all the emissions, I think they've lightened something in the motor to make it a little bit more free revving.
Well, that's coming from the motocross bike. Remember?
Right.
That was the and on the motocross side of things a couple years ago, KTM started going to this. I don't want to say that they're not 450s. They're more like a 400 than a 500. They said, hey, we're going to make our engine really light, which helps the handling. And in that essence, they're also going to make it rev a little bit more to get the power. And I think that's what this bike is doing also.
Well, yeah, like on the trail, when I went out with perfect traction, the bike worked really well, even in really technical sections. But originally, I went out in some dry conditions. That's when I was talking to Jimmy about this, and I kept complaining that under technical stuff, I wanted bigger throttle positions, but all of a sudden the rear tire would actually start spinning, and I'd have to use clutch.
And at first we blamed the tires, so we fixed that. We got good tires, and it still happened. Right. And I thought he was full of it, and then I went and rode it in really good traction, and then the rain dried up, and then I'm like going, Scott, you're exactly right. This thing does spin up, and it's got some power and some surge. It's just the RPMs like to build pretty quick, so as if you compare it to a dirt bike, as tame as the throttle feels, like it doesn't bap, bap. It doesn't do
No,
that.
no, it's not quick, but it
it builds and pulls
right.
hard enough to where it's going to spin the tire. So it's actually a pretty amazing, like if you roll it on in the street, like in third gear, it will actually start lifting the front end. So it's not that it's slow. It's just not gonna. It pulls pretty good for something that's really corked up.
Yeah, it's really good bottom. I mean, you're noticing flatten out a little bit on top.
Yeah.
But it's just the way the power is. It's almost like if you were riding a two-stroke, I'd want a little bit more flywheel weight.
Right.
To just hold between each pulse of the way it chugs between each pulse. Between pulses, there's not a lot of traction. It wants to throw the pulse
so
too
really
quick.
really low RPMs, like when you're really chugging with big throttle. And as you get more and more comfortable, and that's what I found, is I started going, when there was good traction, you can do the big throttle.
Right.
When there's not good traction, you do the big throttle, and it starts spinning the tire. Right. It starts accelerating. So a couple things. One of the things they have to do to meet the sound is the rev ceiling is not very high. It's just a little bit above 9,000 RPMs is where the rev cut is, and when you're riding it normally, you'll never hit the rev limiter. But if you run it up there, you feel it taper, so it causes you to make another shift. And I'm pretty sure that we got top speed on this bike in 5th gear, and it was about 96 miles an hour on the dry lake bed. You click into 6, it's a little bit like an overdrive, but boy, that'll help you if you do uncork it, and we will when we start working on this as a project bike. Kind of other things about the motor, I thought the clutch is magnificent. I really like the Magura stuff, especially on the clutch side. I like the feel and the control that it has, possibly even better than the Brembo. The transmission, I think, is spaced perfectly, which is really strange for a compliant bike. I mean, first gear is usable for first gear. You mentioned you might want to add a tooth. And
add a tooth in the rear. But that's when I was riding it in dry conditions, and I kept on feeling like I was in between. But when I got it into wet conditions, I didn't notice it. But again,
and I was the same way. I'm like, man, if you added another tooth, that responsiveness that is bad when it's dry might be worse. Right. But then I could probably get away with riding a gear high and make it go away.
But if I'm in second going up those hills, I could use less throttle, and I think I could chug up them without having to use bigger throttle positions, and it might help me better. The one thing I did notice is that when you get into technical sections, you realize that the motor does get a little warm pretty quick, and the fan does kick on quite a bit.
And that, in my experience, is 100% related to this screen that's back here in the back of the muffler. It's a little perf thing. And if it were me and this were my bike, that might not be in there for very long. And that would probably be the only change I would make.
He lives in Nevada.
Yeah. And it doesn't really make a big difference in sound. Or you could just replace the muffler with one that's also, and we'll do some of this stuff. We have some stuff on our website that talks about just different ways to increase the performance and stuff. But yeah, it does get hot, and it's mostly because it's kind of choked up. But in my experience, and I rode some extreme enduro trails on it, the fan will cool the bike back down. If you don't keep abusing the clutch, and abusing the clutch is where most of the heat comes from.
I mean, definitely you ride the bike from the get-go. If you're a motocrosser or if you're used to riding a regular off-road bike, you do feel that it is choked up.
It is.
And it's a dual sport bike, and everybody talks about horsepower numbers, but like Jimmy said, when we're trail riding, we're never using 49, 50, 55 horsepower. I mean, on a full off-road bike. Right. Motocross bike.
Right.
You're never going wide open in this thing.
And so really when you're modifying, you're mostly changing the throttle response down low, how it responds, and give this thing a chance. Like actually take it out and ride it, and you'll start finding like that it actually does. It goes pretty quick. I was riding with guys out in the trails on full on their race bikes, and no problem keeping up with them, or maybe even walking away from them. And the power doesn't get in the way of me going fast. It actually kind of helps it most of the time.
Yeah, believe it or not, it's like you ride it, you feel like it is actually a little bit corked up. But if you grab a handful of throttle, next thing you know, you got traction. It's wheeling, even third gear.
Yeah, and everybody wants to rip the reed valve out of the intake. Right. Trust me, don't do it. It's good. It's in there for sound, but it also gives the bike good torque.
Right. I mean, if you're going to turn it into a motocross bike and maybe do something different, but
once you're more than 3/4 throttle, and maybe if you change your ECU to get power up there, the reed valve may actually become restrictive. But for the most of the time, listen to when you're riding and then kind of decide. So that's our take on the power, and it's good.
Yes, it is good. All right, suspension. Now this bike compared to the motocross bike does have different suspension. As the motocross bike still has the air fork, this is actually the Explorer spring fork. So it is different, probably not as high end. dollar wise, but for quality, it works really well. For me, being a little bit bigger, I mean, it's plush and smooth, but I did find it a little bit soft in some conditions.
Yeah, and then so we set the bike to have like 30 millimeters of kind of static sag, and both being close to 200 pounds, some on top, some below 200 pounds. We're kind of at the edge of what the spring will do, and so using it to adjust the ride height. I got it pretty much perfect for me, and for true dual sport riding conditions, I was pretty surprised at how good the suspension is, and it's kind of been a consistency with all the KTM and Husky products running on this WP Explorer stuff. They did a really good job. And the Husky specifically is a little bit more plush on the initial part of the stroke. It seems like it's the tires are moving and following the ground maybe just a little bit better than the KTM riding on a PDS shock and a very similar fork. The big difference between the forks, by the way, is the preload adjuster. Husky comes with the spring preload adjuster, which I actually didn't feel the need to use. But I think both of us monkeyed around a little bit more with the forks than anything else, kind of playing around mostly with the compression. And I felt that the compression kind of affects the mid speed more than the initial, because sometimes in the rocks I wanted to make it a little bit plusher, and other times when I was riding in sand or in the desert, I wanted it to be just hold itself up a little bit better, and it kind of always affected the mid stroke. So I was kind of back and forth on the fork. It was just a personal preference. It wasn't like really sort of a complaint, and it seemed like the back was always just working really good. Enough initial to be very comfortable, and plenty of bottom resistance to not cause any problems.
Now I have a few pounds on Jimmy, and number one, it was a little bit soft, so I went in on the compression, which helped, and it didn't really screw up the small bump compliance for me that much. My biggest issue was that once the suspension, especially the fork, gets moving into the stroke, like a little G-outs and whatnot, I noticed it did bottom, and I was using all the stroke. And for me, could probably need a little bit more oil on the fork to help hold it up a little bit on towards the last quarter of the stroke. And maybe springs, but probably not, because I don't want to lose that good small compliance.
I think if you go to a stiffer spring in the rear, you could probably go up one, maybe two in the rear and run it pretty loose, then matching it with a stiffer front fork. I think I could get away with these springs, maybe go up one in the rear, if I'm kind of getting picky. But overall, I was pretty happy with how it worked. And the one thing is, like I said, I played around with some of the adjustments, and the bike isn't picky, and that's always a sign of a good overall package, a good handling bike. Now, if we unleash some power out of the motor, then things could change a little bit, but as is.
It is a dual sport bike, so you can't go in with these over expectations that you're riding a motocross bike or a fully set up like closed course.
Hey, I hucked some big jumps. I mean, that had consequential landings and stuff, and it landed just as good as the motocross bike. I mean, as far as like once it was bottomed out and the way it controlled it and everything, it was really good. It wasn't the same, bottomed out more, but
I clunked it a few times trying to jump it myself. But again, I have probably 20 pounds on Jimmy, so that believe it or not, that 20 pounds makes quite a bit of a difference. So I just need the bike to hold up a little bit higher and a little bit towards the latter end of the stroke. The shock, I really didn't have any real issues with it. I'm mostly, if I was going to mess with something, maybe a spring, a little bit of work on the fork.
Yeah, agreed. So on to the handling and the chassis and kind of the bike as a package. This is a light feeling motorcycle. If you would have handed me this and just had me hop on it 3 years ago, I would have said, man, it feels like a 350. And in a lot of ways, like I said, it's a tamed down power, but it has that light, nimble, agile feel that all the stuff that they're doing, making the motor a little bit smaller, changing the chassis, is really paying off. And if you're coming off like a 2016 version of this bike, it's a noticeable step forward. Even from the last version, it's a noticeable step down in how light, responsive, just overall, everything about this bike says very lightweight.
Well, last year Husky offered this bike in a 450, and I understand why they didn't even offer a 450 this year, because this thing feels lighter than a 450 as a trail bike. It's probably the culmination of the way the motor, the head works, and also, again, they put in this light flywheel effect, which gives it the bike a lighter feeling because it's not chugging from pulse to pulse, giving it that heavy flywheel
and
effect.
even
on
when
the bike.
when it's revving, there's not
Right.
a lot of spinning stuff.
Right.
You know, the spinning stuff got lighter, so that adds to it. It's in that respect, it's not. I feel it's very stable. I know Scott tightened the headset up just
Right.
a little bit to add some stability. I've never met a bike that didn't like a steering stabilizer. This bike is the same, but I don't think it's unstable in any way. It's like wherever you know, if you think about making this bike go someplace, it's already starting to go there.
It tracks really well. I mean, for me, I think because I set the shock at 30 millimeters, I was probably still a little bit on the low side when it comes to sag, so I was a little low in the rear, which made the front end feel a little lighter than it could be. I think if I got a spring, it would probably add a little bit more weight to the front, and I wouldn't have as much of a light feeling.
And I went in a turn more on the shock preload just to get a little bit more weight on the front because I felt it, and I thought maybe we're going to get to some instability when I did that, and nothing. So again, this chassis doesn't really mind, you know, being moved around. Sign of a good chassis. It can get away with a wide range of stuff. Now I'm going to pick on some things. This rear fender, and wait till you watch the videos. You watch the videos, you'll see this thing flop all over the place.
Yeah.
We actually, the bolts got loose.
It came on. Actually,
it got loose.
I was riding and it actually fell off.
Yes.
I had to wire it together.
Yeah, it's got a little wire and zip ties, but it's still there. I was surprised. When I was actually jumping this thing, and I thought for sure I was going to eat the license plate. I didn't manage to survive. It's better than the last version. Not as good as the previous version before that. But anyways, there's a lot of aftermarket for that. The other thing, the headlight, for instance, great light. It actually shoots pretty good light, except for there's a lip up in the front that allows light to come up. So if you stand up, it shoots light up into your eyes. I mean, I'm sure it's a design feature, but come on, somebody's got to at least test that stuff before you invest in the mold.
Yeah, for me, I went out and came back at night one time, and I actually had to stuff a little something in here to hold the light, so it was on the ground.
Oh, so it's aiming. Yeah, you can adjust it. Yeah, you can adjust it down, but it's actually the light from in front of the shell is coming up. It's also shooting up in the air. The fuel range, you got 80?
I got about 80 miles, but it was down to fumes when I came back.
I got about 74, I'm sorry, I got 78, 76 or 78, but the reserve light came out and I only had 6 miles from the time the light came on to when it went dry. So that means we're doing about 35, 38 miles an hour.
My ride was mostly off-road, but it wasn't an aggressive off-road, so we were cruising quite a bit. Now, if you were riding a little bit harder, I was
in sand on very fast roads.
Okay.
A lot of I did a little bit of everything, but I think that's a pretty fair assessment of fuel range.
Yeah, from aggressive to a little mellower. You know, you can milk maybe 8 to 10 miles out of it if you knew you were going to go a full 80.
Yeah,
and you'd be close to making it all the way.
The bike is thin and narrow, easy to move around on. There are bigger tank options, of course, to do stuff. Right. And kind of onto the brakes. I don't think the brakes are exactly as good as the KTM's, and I'm nitpicking here. Scott misses the rear brake pedal.
Yeah, it's one thing. This is a problem I've had with the motocross bikes as well. It's like the brake pedal seems like
they made it a little bit longer.
It's tucked in, and actually I want it shorter. And I want it tucked. I want it sticking out a little bit.
It's missing part of your foot that
because when I have my foot on the peg, I have to actually move it too far forward because I want to be a little bit back. I'm not on the ball, but I want to be able to articulate, and I keep missing it.
And I feel like the engagement, you know, the initial bite of both brakes is a little bit softer than what I'm used to on the KTM's, and the overall power is just a tad back. Not to say that's bad. It's just kind of what it is.
They may have tuned that in because it is going to be on the street, and they don't want touchy, quick reacting brakes. You never know.
Right. These mirrors are kind of a joke. We usually take them off. You'll notice that in all of the videos. And other than that, I mean, all the components, foot pegs, everything else is pretty stinking on point. And even the Husky, the way that they kind of shape their radiator shrouds in up at the top. I noticed it. It doesn't catch on bushes that much, and luckily it comes with a nice skid plate to also keep the frame rails in check.
They've taken all the plastic basically from the motocross bike and put it into a sleek design. So this bike looks quite a bit better than the previous Husky when it comes to aesthetics, I think.
Right.
Okay, the world of under $10,000 motorcycles is behind us. Now, this bike has a suggested list of $11,499 with tax and license and everything like that. You're talking about a $12,000 motorcycle here. Now, even with that, I want one. And in fact, I'm going to try to buy this one because I like it so much. Because I miss having a dual sport bike, and I miss being able to leave out of my house and go ride sometimes, and just being able to have an all over everything off-road bike. Now, after riding this thing, it handles really well. It's got good power. Yes, I might go ride to Jimmy's house and uncork it a little bit, maybe do a few things and make it off-roadable. But for the most part, suspension-wise and as a dual sport bike, it works really well. I could be a little bit firmer for me, but overall as a package, it handles really well. It motor works really well. Suspension is a little soft for me.
So I think, we're talking $12,000 dirt bike, and that's just the way things are. You're getting a lot of motorcycle for that money, in all honesty. It's a race bike that you can ride on the street.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff to do, and a lot of the questions we get are, hey, what's the difference between this and the dirt bike? We will tell you. We have one just sitting right over there. We're going to tell you soon what the differences are and how they compare. If you don't need the license plate, the license plate is a ticket to ride any place you would like to, and that's like a premium. And it's nice that KTM and Husky put it in a package that is so easy to use. And then the other question is, hey, what's the difference between this and the KTM? Well, guess what? We have a KTM sitting over there, and we will tell you the differences between the two bikes when we spend more time on the KTM, which we just picked up. Those are the kind of questions we usually get, but all in all, I'm really impressed with this bike. I tend to lean more towards the PDS suspension, kind of on a personal basis. But I was really impressed with how the Husky handled that. There's all kinds of stuff, and a lot of guys that buy these bikes, the first thing they do is run down to Mr. Horsepower and say, hey, what do I do? Or they look at some bald dude on the internet, and he's like telling you 10 things you can do to get 50 more horsepower out of your bike. I don't really feel like I need that, and I'm going to kind of coach Scott, or hopefully pull the reins in on Scott. We'll do it in steps, and by the time he has a 75 horsepower Husky FE501s, we'll let you know the steps and how to get there. But like I said, all in all, pretty awesome bike. I don't think, if this is what you're looking for, a high performance dual sport motorcycle, you absolutely are not going to go wrong with this bike.
Yeah, I don't think I would need to do that much to it to personalize it for me.
Yeah,
there's not a lot.
But in reality, not much more than you would have to do to a
bike.
Motocross bike on the suspension side.
Right.
You have to do that kind of tuning, and then this is just like, hey, what kind of power do I really need? So we're on a little bit of a mission to find that.